In late September of 2021, I took a solo weekend trip into the Olympic National Park in Washington. I was burned out from work and I needed silence, the kind of silence only old forests can offer. I booked a rustic, solar-powered cabin near Lake Quinault, the type with no Wi-Fi, no cell signal, and a hand-pump sink. It sounded perfect. The first day was everything I'd hoped for. I went hiking along a moss-covered trail where thick trees arched overhead like they were protecting something ancient. The air smelled of pine and earth, and the only sounds were my boots on the path and the occasional chirp of unseen birds. I didn't see another soul. That isolation felt like a cleanse, but by dusk the temperature dropped fast. A heavy mist started rolling in from the lake as I made my way back to the cabin. The trail, which had felt inviting hours earlier, now looked unfamiliar. Shadows stretched unnaturally, and the trees seemed closer. When I reached the cabin, fog had swallowed everything beyond the porch light's reach. I lit a lantern, ate a cold sandwich, and listened to the wind shift through the trees. Around midnight, I woke up to a metallic tapping sound, faint, precise, like something was tapping against the window frame, not hard enough to break it, just enough to make sure I heard it. I froze in bed, trying to convince myself it was tree branches, but the pattern didn't match the wind. It was too steady. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps again. I didn't move. Eventually it stopped. The next morning I stepped outside and looked around the cabin. No footprints, no branches anywhere near the windows. The mist was still clinging low to the ground like it didn't want to leave. I should have packed up and gone home right then, but I convinced myself it was nothing. I even laughed at how paranoid I'd been. I decided to take a shorter trail that day, one that looped near a creek and stayed within a couple miles of the cabin. That hike didn't go like the first one. About 30 minutes in, I started hearing a low rhythmic sound, like 2 stones clacking together. I paused, thinking maybe it was a woodpecker or some animal, but the sound moved. It circled me just beyond the trees. I never saw anything. I called out once, just a simple hello, but the sound stopped and the forest went completely still. No birds, no rustling leaves, just waiting. I didn't finish the loop. I turned back, but as I retraced my steps, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. Small stacks of rocks along the edge of the trail, perfectly balanced, about knee-height every 10 feet or so. They weren't there earlier, I was sure of it. I've seen trail markers before. This wasn't that. These felt placed. That night the fog was even thicker. I locked the door, pulled the blinds shut, and kept the lantern burning, but around 2 a.m. something woke me up again, not tapping this time, breathing. It was outside the window. Deep, strained breathing, wet and uneven, like something was dragging in air through torn lungs. I lay there, barely breathing myself, as it moved slowly along the cabin wall. I didn't look. I didn't want to see it. I don't know why, but some instinct screamed that whatever it was, it didn't belong here, not in this world. The breathing stopped after a while. I waited another hour before I dared get up. In the morning, I packed everything. I didn't even eat. I just threw my gear in the car and started the drive out. But the road back was partially washed out. My GPS had no signal, and I had to use an old map from the glove box. I took what looked like a back road detour, gravel, narrow, overgrown. I drove slowly, praying I wouldn't blow a tire. That's when I saw it, in the rearview mirror. Something tall, impossibly thin, was standing at the edge of the trees behind me, not walking, not moving, just watching. Its body was the color of moss, and its limbs looked jointed in the wrong places, like broken branches forced to stand upright. I didn't stop. I didn't look again. I finally got signal about 30 miles out and followed the fastest route home. For days afterward, I kept checking my photos. I hadn't taken many, but I noticed something strange in the one of the trail. Between the trees, far in the background, was a figure, barely visible, almost blending in with the trunks. But it was there. I've since deleted that photo. I've tried to forget the breathing, the tapping, the stacks of rocks. But every so often, when fog rolls in through my town, I hear 3 slow taps at my window, and I don't live anywhere near the woods anymore. In early May of 2022, I visited a small patch of protected forest in northern Vermont with my girlfriend at the time. We weren't hardcore hikers, just weekend adventurers looking to unplug. We'd rented a secluded cabin near the Green Mountain National Forest, a place surrounded by tall pines and framed by a meadow that stretched like a forgotten field out of time. The kind of place that made you forget roads existed. The cabin itself had no electricity, just an old wood-burning stove, a compost toilet, and a single solar panel powering a radio and one light bulb. We thought it was charming, romantic even. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles away. The owners told us that wildlife would be our only visitors. The first evening was quiet. Cold air settled early, and the woods held that stillness you only notice when there's nothing around to disturb it. We made a fire, played cards, and watched the sun dip behind the trees. But something odd happened as night fully set in. From the back porch, I noticed the tree line looked different. Not thicker or thinner, just off. The trees stood perfectly still, but one patch, about 30 feet wide, looked darker than the rest, not because of shadows. It was as if light refused to touch that section. I joked that it looked like a missing puzzle piece, like something had carved a bite out of the forest and left a hollow spot. She laughed, but neither of us really liked looking at it. After a while, we went inside and chalked it up to weird lighting. The next morning, I walked toward that patch of trees, just to satisfy my curiosity. It was maybe 100 feet from the cabin. As I got closer, the air temperature noticeably dropped. I even rubbed my arms. There was no breeze, no clouds, just this strange, dense cold. And then I saw something I couldn't explain. Every tree in that darker section was dead. They weren't broken or fallen. They stood upright, bark intact, but completely grey, drained. No moss, no insects. The ground was dry and cracked like it hadn't seen water in years, though the rest of the forest was green and full of spring growth. There wasn't even birdsong in that area. I backed away slowly. Something about that silence felt unnatural, predatory. That evening, things got worse. Around 9 p.m., the wind picked up, but only on the side of the cabin, facing the dead trees. The rest of the woods remained perfectly still. I stood on the porch again, trying to listen for branches or animals, but it was just that low, whooshing wind, circling in a way that felt deliberate. My girlfriend called me inside, said she thought she saw someone standing near the edge of that patch, a silhouette, too tall, no flashlight, no movement. I didn't see it at first, but when we looked out together, we both saw something shift behind the tree line. No sound, just a vertical shape moving without breaking any branches. Then it was gone. We didn't sleep much that night. The cabin creaked more than usual, and once or twice I swore I heard something brush against the outer wall. Not walking, more like sliding. In the early morning, when the sky just started to lighten, we finally managed to doze off for a bit. But when we woke up, everything outside was wrong. The entire field between the cabin and the tree line was covered in small piles of rocks. Hundreds of them, each no more than a foot high, arranged in perfect rows. We hadn't heard anything. It had happened overnight. And right in the center of them, facing the cabin, was a larger stack, about waist high. Sitting on top of it was something pale. I didn't want to go near it, but I had to know. I walked carefully through the grass, avoiding the stacks, until I reached the center one. The thing on top was a deer skull, clean, bleached, and staring directly at our front door. We left that morning without finishing breakfast, packed in 10 minutes. I didn't even care that we left gear behind. The owner didn't answer the phone for days. When I finally got a hold of him and asked if anyone else had reported strange things near the cabin, he paused for a moment and said something that has stuck with me ever since. He said, "If you noticed the tree line, then you're lucky it noticed you back. People who camp too close to it don't usually leave anything behind. I've never returned." I looked up records, news, old property logs, nothing. No official reports of disappearances. But I did find one blurry photo online, supposedly taken by a hiker in that region a few years prior. The image shows a stretch of forest with a clear break in the canopy. One section of trees standing darker, taller, and slightly tilted inward, like they're leaning in toward something. I don't know what it is. I don't think it's something I was meant to understand. But now, sometimes, when I walk past wooded areas near my home, I glance at the tree lines, not looking for a shape, not exactly, but just making sure none of them lean inward. Because if I ever see that again, I won't wait for it to notice me. In mid-October of 2021, I spent a weekend in southern Utah, hiking through a lesser-known section of Red Rock Canyons, not too far from Escalante. I'd done trips through the area before, but this time I wanted solitude. No campgrounds, no noise, just me, a tent, and the deafening silence of desert air. I'd scoped out a spot the previous year, deep in a canyon that required some scrambling, but ended in a beautiful alcove shaded by stone overhangs. It felt like the desert's version of a cathedral. I arrived by noon and hiked in before the sun got brutal. There were no trails, but I had GPS markers and a printed topo map. As I reached the alcove and dropped my pack, I noticed something I hadn't seen the year before. At the far end of the canyon wall, near a dry stream bed, was a narrow opening between two vertical slabs of rock. Not a cave exactly, more like a tall, jagged crack. It looked unnatural, like the earth had been forced apart in a violent way. Something about it made my skin pull tight over my spine. But curiosity got the better of me. I approached it slowly. The air near the gap was noticeably cooler, despite the sun overhead. I leaned closer and heard something that stopped me in place. It wasn't wind, not dripping water either. It sounded like breathing, not human, but slow and deep, like something asleep and buried beneath a mountain. I backed away fast, told myself it was airflow or some acoustics thing. But I didn't feel like exploring anymore. I set up camp farther from the rocks than I originally planned. That night I couldn't sleep. The desert gets cold, but the air felt dense, heavy in my lungs. Around midnight I sat up, unzipped the tent, and just listened. Silence. Then, after a long pause, the sound returned. Breathing, not loud, not close, but rhythmic, like it was underneath everything. It didn't seem possible, but I felt it in my chest, as if the canyon itself was exhaling. I waited, barely moving, until it stopped again. I stayed awake until sunrise. When I finally stepped outside, the whole canyon felt off. The birds that usually chirped in the early light were gone. The dry creek bed had a thin mist hovering above it, and near the narrow crack I saw something I wish I could forget. There were rocks piled at the base of the opening, not stacked like cairns, just scattered in a ring, and sitting right in the center of them, partially buried in red dust, was a boot. Not new, not old, hiking grade, laced up tight. But what unnerved me wasn't the boot, it was what was inside it. A foot, severed clean, no bone, no blood trail, just there like it had always been. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have service, and hiking out would take hours. I debated taking a photo, but the second I raised my phone, something shifted in the crack. Just a soft scraping sound, like nails on stone. I left it. I didn't run, but I walked fast and deliberate, away from that alcove and straight toward the canyon mouth. I didn't care about gear or the map. I just wanted to see open sky and put miles between me and whatever that breathing had come from. I made it out by dusk and drove to the nearest ranger station. The guy at the desk looked at me like I was dehydrated or hallucinating, but he agreed to send someone out. I gave him the GPS pin and tried to explain exactly what I'd seen. He nodded slowly, then said something strange. He said I wasn't the first to report weird things in that section of the canyon. People had claimed the rocks moved when you weren't looking. A few hikers had gone missing, but their gear always turned up days later, neatly packed. No bodies, no signs of animal attack. The breathing, though, no one had mentioned that before. I asked him if anyone had gone inside that crack in the wall. He didn't answer, just looked at the radio on his desk and tapped it with his finger like he was deep in thought. Then he told me to forget about it, said some places weren't meant to be explored. That night I booked a hotel instead of sleeping in my car, but even with walls around me I couldn't shake the sound. I kept thinking about how it seemed to sync with my own breath, like it was mimicking me, or waiting for me to match its pace. 3 days later I checked the local news and saw a tiny headline: "Park search finds abandoned campsite, no evidence of distress." They listed the coordinates I gave, no mention of the boot, no mention of a missing person, just another redacted oddity in the endless wilderness. Weeks went by and the dream started, always the same. I'm back in the canyon, standing near that crack, except this time I can see something inside. Not clearly, just a shape, large, curled in on itself, like a sleeping animal made of stone and dust. But then it starts to move, slowly stretching out, like it's waking up. And every time I wake up just as its eye opens. I've never returned. I deleted the GPS pin, threw away the printed maps. But sometimes, late at night, I hold my breath, just to make sure I'm not still hearing it. The low, rhythmic inhale, like the earth is sleeping beneath me, and one day it's going to breathe me in. Thanks for venturing deep into these chilling true stories from the shadows of nature. If these tales left you uneasy in the best way, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss what's lurking in the next story. Stay curious, stay cautious.